Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the live today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I appreciate you watching. Thank you for joining me today. Today, our big thing that we're going to cover is going to be PHP, but I did receive a question before we went live this morning about styling text added with JavaScript. And so it's easier than you might think, right? Like we might just kind of overcomplicate things because one of the key things to remember there is that everything sort of works together. So since I was going to be working in a new REPL today, I'm going to create a new REPL here. Let me switch my camera view over here. We're going to create a new REPL. We'll start out by creating a new HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Just so we can simulate adding some JavaScript to a page and then fixing the styling with CSS. Right, and so we'll do it in two different ways. We'll do it in the document.write way, and we will do it in the inner HTML way that we demonstrated in the video that I put out last week. But you know what? Before I get to that, let me give you a couple of announcements, because we do have a couple of announcements that I will need to go through before we get started today. So I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm excited to answer questions. First and foremost would be the announcement that this is going to be the last live class of the summer. Normally, you know, we've come up to the end of the class here, right? We only have 2 modules left, and these 2 modules that we have left are very short modules. You know, I don't expect you all to do very much with PHP or with MySQL, which is the next module. So we don't really spend a whole lot of time on them. And normally I would have a live where I was just available for questions about people who are putting their final projects together. But I guess the second announcement that I have is that I will be away at conference for 3 days next week. Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of next week, I will be away at a conference, which will mean that I will have minimal availability. I'll still have access to the internet and everything, obviously, so I'll still be able to answer questions if you have any for, you know, putting your final projects together. There is a video in the final project module there that kind of shows you, you know, gives you some ideas of what I'm expecting and things like that. But if you have any further questions, you can send them in. I might be a little slower about getting back to you, but I will get back to you. You know, I'll just be away. So let's add some text here with JavaScript and then style it up. You know, basically the easiest way for us to do it, and it's actually kind of a good idea because it's going to kind of scale into what we're talking about with PHP today, and that's kind of letting these different languages and these different files sort of work together. Right, so if I add a paragraph here with document.write, and let me just get a lorem ipsum generator here up on another screen, just so I can get some dummy text to put in here really quickly, just so I have more than just a few words on screen. We can see, okay, got some dummy text there in a document.write, so that'll replace the hello world that's in there. Or actually, it'll just add to the end of the hello world, right? It's adding it to our document at the bottom. And we have this lorem ipsum in there. So we can see that we're using this JavaScript here to insert the HTML, but if we look at what's going on our page, right? If we go to our page here and we view our page source, or actually I need to inspect element in modern browsers. If we go to our page here and we inspect element, we look at the body here and we see what it's done, is that it's basically just inserted this text as plain text into our HTML file. So it just takes whatever we write into there and puts it into the HTML file just as text, right? So if we were to add HTML tags in here as a part of this, it's going to transfer them over to our HTML document. So if I put a paragraph, so if I include a paragraph here and make this part in H1, make our first little part in H1, and then we run that, we see it includes that in our document, right? And so as such, right, when we look at our replit here and we do the inspect element again, we can see that it's got H1 tags. We can see that it's got a paragraph here, right? So it's just taking whatever we put in there and it's putting it on our page. Which also means that we could add classes and IDs to these elements, just like we would with anything else, right? Like I could put ID equals, and on the inside of double quotes in JavaScript, if I need to use quotes, I'll always use single quotes. So ID equals, let's say green, just so we have, or we'll call it GR. So we'll give our H1 here an ID of GR. And we're just going to make our files work together. So I can jump down here to my style.css. I can add a hashtag GR for the ID of green, and I can make a color green. So when I run that, we can see there, it's green now. And so I can apply any CSS styles to this that I would apply to anything else, right? Like if I wanted to put a background color behind that, maybe I want to make a background color of yellow here. Maybe I want to text align center. Maybe I want to give this a different width, like let's say a 800 pixel width. And we'll margin 0 auto and give it a little padding of say 12 pixels. Right? It's all going to adjust accordingly because everything works together. Right? So that's sort of the smartest thing. Like there is a bunch of stuff that you can do in JavaScript that would add, you can add classes with JavaScript, and you can add CSS2 classes with JavaScript and just write like CSS in JavaScript. But it's a whole lot easier for us to just kind of include these IDs, include these classes, and do this styling in this sort of way. Right, like you can do, like for example, you can write CSS in JavaScript. Like if I wanted to say document dot, and I'll use query selector here since this isn't really for anything but demo, document.query selector body to select my body tag dot style dot background color, and I could make that equal to say hashtag. Let's make it brown maybe. So let's say something like 773300 brown. And that's not the right background color. It's camel cased in JavaScript. And so if we ran that, we make background brown. But we could also, add a class here to our paragraph. We'll make it just like paragraph. And in our CSS, we can do, dot what did we call it? Paragraph. So dot paragraph. Background color white. Width 800 pixels, margin 0, auto, padding 12 pixels. And we get that. Right? So we can style and we can do we can do things in JavaScript, but I prefer when I can deal with it just to do all my styling in the CSS file. That way, like, you can centralize your CSS, and it's going to work if we did this with inner HTML as well. It basically just works in the exact same way, right? Like, for example, if I put a section in here and give it the ID of new section, let's say. Let's put that in quotes. And just leave it empty. So now I have this element that I could style on its own, right, in my HTML. But also I could style anything that I added to that via inner HTML. So document dot get element by ID, new section dot inner HTML equals, and we could just put a little p class equals, and we'll give it the same paragraph class. This is another paragraph. And add it like so. Right, and you can see it's got the same styling as the other paragraph here because we put the same class on it. So we've just sort of centralized all of our styling here to make it to put it all in one place and have it all kind of be isolated. Right, and again, like, this is where a lot of this stuff kind of gets confusing, is because you can do about 20 different things to get the same solutions. And at the end of the day, right, it's basically just whatever works and whatever makes the most sense to you. If you're trying this kind of stuff and it's not working, my suggestion would be to look for typos. Typos will kill us quicker than anything, basically, when we're doing stuff like this. So make sure you're checking for typos, just making sure that the, for example, the ID of the section that you're trying to impact matches in all places where you're trying to impact that section. Right, and that's going to be and I'm going to drop this file to the person who asked me that question, just so you can have this to reference. And if anybody else would like this file for reference, just let me know, and we will give it to you. But I hope this sort of helped clear things up for you. That we could, it's not as bad as it seems to style text added to Java. Because it's basically this. All right. So now let's move on to talking about PHP. And PHP, probably one of my least favorite languages. When we're dealing with Python and when we're dealing with JavaScript, these are languages that are relatively friendly, right? Like, there are standard things that are among all languages that are, sort of annoying, right? Like, we want to make sure that we're doing capitalization and things of that nature in the proper manner. But PHP is more finicky, right? Like, like, one of the things that you might have noticed when we were working in JavaScript is that if you forget and leave a semicolon off the end of a line in JavaScript, it's probably going to be fine, right? It's probably going to work just fine. PHP, doesn't like that. PHP, when I talk about JavaScript versus PHP, I like to say that, JavaScript is a very one-sided relationship. Like, I like JavaScript, but JavaScript doesn't always like me back. And then PHP actively hates us. So, we just have to be especially vigilant when we're writing PHP, just to make sure that we're writing, what we're supposed to be writing. And typically, just because I don't really have many expectations here for PHP out of you all, like, I just want to kind of get you all accustomed to what it is and how it works. One of the things that I like to do a lot is kind of just do the lab assignment with you all, just to kind of give you an understanding of what's going on. So that's what we're going to do. It'll probably take us about 15-20 minutes here. It won't take us that long. In the process of doing it, I'll kind of explain what these things are and how they work. And then there's the other content that's in the module that will get you a little better understanding of PHP. In general, nowadays in modern web development, we don't use a lot of pure PHP on our own, right? Because PHP is an older language. It's still used a lot because it's the backbone of the WordPress content management system, which is, basically 90% of the websites that you see. But there was not a whole lot of people writing new PHP in favor of other programming languages that are friendlier and more robust. Nowadays people are writing backends, which is what PHP is, right? PHP is a backend language, which means it has to be interpreted by the server. The server takes the PHP, converts it into HTML, and then sends it to you. But nowadays, more people are using things like Python. People are using JavaScript now as backend languages through things like Node.js. Node.js is a backend language that has to be interpreted by the server before it gets sent to the user. That is based in JavaScript. Java itself. There are so many other options that are better as a backend language in 2023 than PHP, just because they're friendlier, they're easy to wrap your head around, they're easier to get started with, they're easier to work more and have more modern features. That, doing a whole bunch of PHP is kind of gone away. But I do want you all to be kind of familiar with what it is and the whole, read, evaluate, print loop thing that we talked about earlier in the semester. So since it's something that has to be evaluated by the server, I actually have to create a different REPL for it. So we can't just use our regular HTML, CSS, JavaScript REPL that we've been using. We have to use a new one. And so I'm going to search PHP, and it's going to give me PHP Web Server. PHP Web Server is the one I want. It has PHP CLI here. CLI is command line interface. That's more if you're just kind of doing some of the programming like we were doing with Python earlier on in the semester, where everything just goes through the command line. In this, we actually want to build a website interface or a website. And so we'll use PHP Web Server for this. And I'll give it a name, Summer 23, CTI 110, PHP. And we will create that REPL. And so you see right now it looks very similar to a standard HTML, CSS, JavaScript REPL that we've been using, right? We have our HTML skeleton here, but it's in a different type of file. It's in a .php file. And so remember that we said previously that when we talked about how the internet works, that the internet works by sending, HTML files from the server via HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol, to the browser of the end user where it gets rendered and then requests CSS and JavaScript files if they're there, like if they're required. But in this case, this isn't an HTML file, so it can't get transferred across HTTP. It is a PHP file. So this PHP file has to have its contents converted into HTML before it's sent across in HTTP. And so that's when we say backend, that's what we're talking about, right? We're talking about the backend, the server, taking this PHP and converting it into HTML before it gets sent out. And so we can see here an echo example, right? It gives us a little echo example here by default. And I can actually delete everything between my body tags here if I want to. So I can delete this script tag. I can delete this comment. One of the things that you'll notice is that it doesn't have an HTML, it doesn't have a CSS file by default. We'll have to add one when we get to that point. But I'll show you how to do that here. And I'll just run this just so you can kind of see what happens when I run it, right? Like you see in the console, some information comes up here. And this is that server processing this text and converting it into HTML. Right? Like if we pop this out into a new window and we look at that hello world here in our page source, we don't see any of that PHP code. We don't see PHP echo. We just see a paragraph, right? Because that's all that my browser can understand. My browser doesn't understand PHP on it. So in your lab assignment, you're asked to do a few things here. I'll drag this over just a little bit so we can kind of see what's going on. You're asked to do a few things here. You're asked to create 10 different headings using a loop. You're asked to create 10 different paragraphs using a loop. So it's going to be basically a heading and a paragraph with the same text. The headings and paragraphs should alternate on the page. So it should go heading, paragraph, heading, paragraph, heading, paragraph, heading, paragraph. If the number of the heading as it shows up on the page is even, the heading should be blue. So heading number 2, heading number 4, heading number 6, heading number 8, so on and so forth should be blue. The odd numbers should, or it should be, yeah, and the odd numbers should be red. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9 should be red. If the paragraph on the page is the first through the 5th paragraph that's on the page, it should say I was created with a small number. And if it was the 6th, or what did I say? 5 or greater. So if it's 1 through 4, it should be created with a small number. And if it's 5 or greater, it should be I was created with a large number. Right. So this is just kind of getting us to evaluate print and loop here, right? Like we're just evaluating conditions. We're putting text onto our website, so that's printing, and we're looping. And so we see our echo command here. Our echo command here is what we use to print, which is what we have in the center here. Echo hello world. And so I'm going to delete that, but I'm going to leave that less than question mark PHP and then PHP greater than. So these are kind of like our tags in HTML for PHP. This PHP tag that we have here indicates that this is where PHP starts. So our less than question mark PHP is where our PHP starts. And then our question mark greater than is where our PHP ends. And so that tells my browser, or that tells my server, actually, I should say, that everything in between these two is PHP. So one of the interesting things that we have to deal with here is that when we're working with PHP, we have to prepend variables with a $sign. That's just one of the kind of things that we do. You know, it's kind of like writing var before a variable in JavaScript. So we just put $sign and then whatever we want our variable name to be, like we'll call it heading. Right, and so this gives us a variable, and just like a variable in JavaScript or a variable in Python, it's just a container. We could put data into it. Right, and so we can set that equal to a string like sample PHP heading. And so now we have a variable that is attached to the heading. Right, so now the way I like to kind of do this is I like to just kind of break it down and do parts at a time, right? Like that's what we did. You know, that's kind of the way we talked about handling problems before. Although just for kind of clarity here, like I could write echo heading, and that should print out sample PHP heading on the page, but I've left something out here just to show you that, like, just how annoying this can be sometimes. Since this is starting a virtual server, one of the things that we have to point out that's different here than previously is that, you know, we have to actually stop our server and restart our server before it'll make the changes. And we see here we get an error, right? Because I said, like, if we miss a semicolon, even a semicolon at the end of a line like that, Java PHP is going to pitch a fit, right? It says unexpected token echo, and it's because I didn't end my line before starting my new echo line. So I need to make sure that I'm terminating all of my lines before starting a new one, because technically this would work just the same. Right, so we could do that. We get sample PHP heading. We do that, we get sample PHP heading. We just have to make sure that we're terminating all of our lines when we're done with our lines of code by ensuring that we have that semicolon. So let's write ourselves a loop here, right? And we can write a for loop the way that we've sort of done with everything else. So you know, when we did for loops with JavaScript, we said we needed three things. We need a place to start, we need a place to end, and we need an iterator. So it's going to look very similar, right? So I'm going to say for $I, let's say, equals 1, semicolon, $I is less than or equal to 10, semicolon, $I plus plus, right? Which looks very similar to the for loop that we looked at briefly in the JavaScript module, right? And just like that as well, we put semicolons here. Or not semicolons, curly braces. And so this will allow me to do whatever I want. For example, say echo heading 10 times. Right? So if I stopped that and started that, we get it echoed 10 times. Now, what if I wanted to make this a heading? Well, I can just put it in here in an H1. So if I put it in here in an H1, I'm going to put my H1s in quotes. Then I'm going to concatenate, which is to just add a plus sign, right? Remember, we talked about this briefly when we talked about Python earlier in the semester, right? Everything sort of converges. It's all sort of similar. And then we add my closing H1 tag there at the end, in quotes. So it gives it this string to interpret and add to the page, right? Which makes it fall in line with that JavaScript styling example we just saw a few moments ago, right? Because we learned that it's just adding this text to the HTML file, and then the HTML file, when it's in our browser, interprets the language that's there and turns it into an H1 or whatever, right? So if we do this, we should see this change from just this plain text to, whoops, what did I do? Oh, you know what? We actually don't need those plus signs, I don't think, in PHP. I think I can just do it like that. Ah, yeah, commas. Commas is what we use in PHP. That's what happens when you do too many programming languages at one time. Right? I'm doing this course and then I'm preparing for fall. Commas is what we use for concatenation in PHP. But it works just like the plus signs in Python. And so now we have 10 headings, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And what's interesting is that we can see that we have 10 headings if we add the value I here. So I can add I, which is my counting variable here. And I can just put like another comma in here, and I can put in quotes, period, space. So it like numbers my heading. All right, so if we stop and start that, I forgot a comma. See, even something that small. 1 sample heading, 2 sample heading, 3 sample heading, 4, 5, 6, 7. 10. Right, so how do we get these to change color? Well, we include a conditional to evaluate the number. And so we say something like, if $I is less than 5. Then we can put ourselves some curly braces in here. Right? This part looks very similar to JavaScript, right? So if you were, working with your conditionals well in JavaScript, then this should be handleable. And then here we will put a class. Class equals, and I think we said this would be blue if it was less than. So we'll just call the class blue, or we'll call it B. All right, so now if we stop and start this, we'll see it only has 4 headings because I'm only echoing this if the value I is less than 5. We'll add our else condition here in a moment, because I want to make these red before I add my else condition. And in order to do that, we need to add our style sheet, which is not in here by default. You could reference your HTML CSS sheet because it's going to work the same way, or you can just type it in here manually. I'm going to type it in here manually. Link rel equals style sheet. Type equals text/CSS. href equals style, let's say, .css. And then this is a self-closing tag, so it's /greater than. Right, so it's a link tag with 3 attributes, 1 for the rel, 1 for the type, and 1 for the reference. And so now all I have to do is just create a new file in my project that has the same name as my reference. So I'm going to create a style.css file here in my project. And in here, I can add my .b class and make it color blue. And that'll make all of those blue. right? So to this, then we could add an else condition that would echo the same thing. Instead of class being B, we can make the class R. We can create a .R here. And we can make the color here red. Although that wasn't the condition, was it? The condition wasn't. What I did here is the condition for the paragraph, not the condition for the heading. Right? So I'm going to take this code and I'm going to copy it to my clipboard because we're going to need it. And I'm going to rewrite this condition because we actually need the modulo here for this condition because this was even odd, wasn't it? Yeah, so like if it was I modulo 2 equals 0, that means that's even, right? We talked about modulo early on in the semester. So this would make all the evens blue. Is that what we said? I think it's what we said. Yep. Evens as blue, odds as red. And so there we have that. All right, that's what we're looking for there. But now since we already have that other condition, right, we can just paste it in here and just change what we put in here. Right? So I'm going to paste this inside of my if condition. And then if it's going to echo a paragraph of I was created, or actually this, because I'm not using a variable here, I can just write I was created with a small number. And if it's a large one, we can write I was created with a large number. And so this will do it. This will add those paragraphs to my even, underneath my even headings, since that's where this is located currently. Right, so we have them under my even headings. And you can see I was created with a large number. I was created with a large number. I was created with a small number. I was created with a small number. And if I were to just take this code from here and copy it into my else condition as well. I was created with a small number. 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 I was created with a large number. I was created with a large number. Large number, large number, large number. And I believe that satisfies all of the conditions of our assignment. So we're doing the whole read, evaluate, print, and loop. Right? We're, so we've got some conditions that we're evaluating. We're looking at a style sheet and bringing it in. We're looking at various things. Right? And so this is basically the assignment that you have to do. And I am going to provide it. Or I'll at least provide the video. I might provide this file as well. We'll just see about it. Once again, I don't need us getting too deep into PHP. If we can do the basic, read, evaluate, print, and loop with it, it's going to make me happy. So I think we can go ahead and wrap up here. We'll take questions from anybody. If anybody has questions, I am monitoring Teams and email. If you are uncomfortable putting them in the YouTube chat, if you want to put them in one of these other options, you can do that as well. lot of stuff to unpack here, and I do have to kind of move through it pretty quickly because I mentioned earlier, I do have a meeting that I need to be in here shortly, so kind of have a hard out today, but that is what the recording's for, so you can go back and look at all that again, and I'll get that posted as soon as possible. We'll just hold a minute for questions here, just in case anybody has any. While we're holding for questions, just a couple of reminders. About the announcements. This will be our last live class of the summer. We're almost done, right? We only have like a week and a half or so left. So let's see here. It's the JavaScript module is due today, right? JavaScript module due JavaScript module due today. PHP due on the 24th. Right? Since we've done it together here, that should be pretty easy to get in. Databases module is going to be due on the 27th. That is while I will be gone at the conference. Remember, I'll be going to conference for 3 days next week, 26th through the 28th. I will have less availability during that time. However, I think a lot of students in general seem to take really well to the MySQL module, find it pretty easy. So I don't think you will have any problems. Then the only thing left is to pull together your final projects and final exams, which are on noon, or which are by noon on August the 1st. And then after that, we're done, right? So Module 9 due today, Module 10 due the 24th, Module 11th due the 27th, final project and final exam due by the 1st of August. It is a bit of a sprint here to finish off the summer semester, but hopefully you'll see that the final projects, you've mostly already done the final project. You just have to tweak it and include a few. So with that being said, since I'm also not seeing any questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up here for today. If you think of any questions later on, please send me an email or a Teams message and let me know. But that is all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the future, because this is the last live class of the summer. So maybe we'll see you in the fall. Thanks for watching.